So now I will introduce everyone that's involved. So first and foremost, we have the candidate, which is Niina Sundin. And she holds a Master of Science of degree in Nutrition Science from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm. And she has received her postgraduate education here at the Department of Energy and Technology. So the opponent is Dr. Christian Reynolds from the Center of Food Policy at the University of London. In the evaluation committee, we have Professor Michael Martin from the Royal Institute of Technology, KTH, in Stockholm. We have Associate Professor Emma Pettersson from the Swedish Food Agency, Livsmedelsverket, in Uppsala. And then we have Dr. Jana Gussens from the Thünen Institute of Market Analysis in Braunschweig, in Germany. So in the supervisor group, we have the main supervisor is Associate Professor Mattias Eriksson from the Department of Energy and Technology. And the co-supervisors, we have Dr. Ingrid Strid, also from the department. We have Associate Professor Christine Persson, also Osowski from Mälardalens University. And Dr. Kristoffer Malefors, also from the department. And also just saying, serving as a reserve in the committee, we have Associate Professor Åke Nordberg, also from the department. So now, before we start, I just want to ask you, Niina, if you have anything you would like to add to your thesis.
There is an errata.
Yes.
It's added in between. Yes.
Good. And anything you want to point out specifically or just small?
There was a calculation error, but this did not impact the main results.
Good. Okay, so let's get started. So, Niina.
Thank you. So I would also like to welcome everybody, both here in person and online, to this PhD thesis defense. Can you hear me, by the way? Is it okay? Titled Sustainability of Food Waste Prevention through Food.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it better? Yeah. Through food consumption. It's a little bit unstable. I hope it works. So despite the common consensus to halve food waste by 2030, an unacceptable amount of food, edible food, keeps being wasted. And food waste is generated throughout the whole food supply chain, starting from the farm all the way to the consumer. And it is thought that the consumer stage is the largest waste generator. And this is problematic for several reasons. And from the environmental point of view, food waste can be thought to be unnecessary stressor in an already overburdened Earth system. And currently 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries have been transgressed. And food systems play a major role in this problem. For example, food systems stand for approximately 30% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And then food waste is roughly 10%. Or 1/3 of this amount. And there is no single mitigative action we can take to correct this problem, but we will need multiple actions. And for example, from the agricultural sector, transition to sustainable diets is one action that has been identified, but so has halving or reducing food waste. But there are other issues related to food waste. In addition to, of course, economic losses, there are also nutritional losses, and there are ethical issues that are related, such as food security or insecurity. So there is you can say, food imbalance paradox ongoing. So while we are producing enough food for everybody globally, there are still billions of people who are food insecure and millions of people who are hungry. And meanwhile, we are wasting approximately 1/3 of the food that is being produced globally. But then we also have an epidemic of food overconsumption that is leading to overweight and obesity, which is sweeping throughout the whole globe. And this is going on an increasing rate. And this is largely due to the systemic failure in our food systems. So as income levels rise, and it's the phenomenon called nutrition transition taking place, this overabundance of high caloric, low nutrient foods increase. And their availability they are 24/7 everywhere, wherever you go. And simultaneously, we become more sedentary in our lifestyles. So it is quite difficult to keep good balance. And solutions to food waste are within a food waste hierarchy. It's quite clear we should preferably prevent food waste. And if we cannot do that, we should reuse it. And then we are talking about perhaps donating to people in need or reusing food for animal feed. And next best option would be to revalorize or recover nutrients, for example, through composting or anaerobic digestion. And then only we should burn it for energy. And least we should dispose. And for example, in Sweden, we don't do this anymore. However, reality is like flipping the triangle upside down. So most food waste globally is still dumped or landfilled, and it's causing massive emissions. And in Sweden, we are mostly somewhere here, incineration and anaerobic digestion. So there is quite large gap between policy and practice. And if we are to reach the goal of halving food waste, we should focus more on the top priorities, which is prevention and reuse. And currently there are not, like, we need more studies to really show that these, whatever options they might be, that they actually are good for the environment and other sustainability aspects. And therefore, we come to the aim of this thesis, where I investigated top priority on this hierarchy options, such as surplus food donation and plate waste prevention in schools, where we could where you can consume the food instead of waste it. And at the same time, I investigated food overconsumption among the Swedish adult population. And this can be seen as metabolic food waste. That is a term used for this type of food. And therefore, first objective of this thesis was to quantify food overconsumption among Swedish adult population and then assess its climate impact. And objective number 2 was to investigate the food waste reduction potential of surplus food redistribution, and then I mean food donations. So from retail, food that has not been sold for whatever reason being donated to people in need, and assess these type of actions, environmental, economic, and social impacts. And here we included also rebound effects. And in this context, rebound effects were expected to rise mainly at the consumer level. When you receive donated food, you can perhaps save some money and then use it for something else, creating emissions. Then objective number 3, now we are moving to school catering. So there, but demonstrating some plate waste prevention measures, including so-called educational approaches, and I will explain that a little later, and meal planning, and evaluate their potential to reduce food waste. And lastly, also then look at the environmental, economic, and social impacts of these measures, these prevention measures. I will quickly, because I had 2 main cases, I will just quickly give introduction to them. So where I was investigating surplus food donation was Uppsala City Mission, and they are supporting socially and financially vulnerable people through 2 subunits. They have a food pack center and they have a soup kitchen, and they have different clientele. So soup kitchen is directed more to the homeless who cannot cook their own food, and food pack center, people with kitchens and homes and who can cook can fetch a weekly food pack there. And I used their 2020 data, and that year they received 237,000 tons. No, sorry, 237 tons of surplus food from different retailers nearby, surrounding Uppsala. And they had 250 members who were once a week fetching a food pack. And in this picture, you can see food packs that have been packed. And you can also see those different color labels on the bags where you indicating whether the food pack contents are vegetarian or perhaps pork-free or something else. So they had some food choice as well. And then they had, that year they redistributed almost 14,000 food packs, and Soup Kitchen had around 12,000 visitors eating cooked food. Then another case was Uppsala Meal Services, or Uppsala Municipality's meal services, and particularly their school canteens. They of course serve also kindergartens and elderly care. But in total, they have 180 kitchens here, and they serve 45,000 meals daily. So it's large operations, and they have many, many goals. So they need to meet their budget, and the food must be nutritious. They have climate goals. They should be low waste. They want to serve organic, local, and seasonal produce, increasingly vegetarian to meet the climate goals, and the food has to be highly accepted. So is that a challenge? We'll see. And in the 6 papers included in the thesis, I've used various methods, mainly life cycle assessment, but also a variety of other methods collecting data to feed as an input data for the life cycle assessments. Just quickly, for the first study, I used mainly statistics like overweight and prevalence statistics of Swedish adults, and then also statistics of dietary intakes. And then LCA data to calculate the climate impact. But then the remaining of the studies were a little bit different. So here I collected a lot of primary data, and it was a lot of fun also to do this. I was doing surveys, interviews, quantifying food waste or using quantified data, composition analysis on food waste, like plate waste, or looking at food bags, what kind of foods were included, and then doing nutritional calculations and things like that. Okay, let's move on to the results. We start with the food over consumption, and the bar to the left is the amount of metabolic food waste in Sweden, annual amount, for approximately 480 kilotons. And then the bar to the left is representing the climate impact of that food. And well, these numbers maybe don't say much, but if we put that into some kind of perspective, we could see that at the time, the amount of metabolic food waste exceeded avoidable household food waste, which indicated that we are talking about substantial amount of food. But also the greenhouse gas emissions were standing for approximately 10% of food-related greenhouse gas emissions. And here I would also like to point out that the recent data is suggesting at least that the household food waste could be, there's a trend going down. We don't know for 100% sure yet, but I mean, we have our goals to reduce food waste and working hard on it. But metabolic food waste, there is most likely an upcoming trend because this is expected to, prevalence is expected to increase, especially for children. So by 2030, from 2000, we are expected to have doubled the prevalence here in Sweden, from 10 to 20%. Okay, we move on to the food donation. And first thing I did was so-called material flow analysis, just to investigate how much of the food that went into the system from retailers, how much of it was eaten and how much was wasted. And here you have the two units. You have the soup kitchen and the food pack center and the amounts going in. And then they're doing their sorting and decision making. What do they do with the food? Because most of the food is perishable foods and near their expiry. They have to decide very quickly what to do with it. And food with the longest remaining shelf life went into the food packs straight away and were handed out the same day. But then the food that could still be used, they decided, okay, but we can send it to the soup kitchen and that could be cooked the same day or the day after into meals. And then they also had some other outlets occasionally where they could push food that they could not use themselves. So it was really like, if you think about the different flows, they were acting both as direct donation, doing direct donations to people in need, but also acting as a food bank. And I think this was one of the sort of success factors that this high number was actually eaten. Considering now that some of it was also inedible, of course, of the food waste, approximately half of the wasted amount, which was 22%. But 78%, I think, is quite good number, considering that it was perishable foods. And how come? Well, I mentioned the efficient handling, the hybrid model that I called. So they were both direct and acting as a food bank, but also the people who received the food actually accepted it. They didn't seem to waste. I was asking in a questionnaire, and they were accepting it, which, yeah, I don't think we should take for granted. And then also perhaps this food choice, that they still had some choice, although you never knew what kind of foods they were getting in from the retail, they were still able to sort of facilitate vegetarian food bags or non-pork or lactose-free and so on. Then let's look at the environmental impacts of food donations. So here I compared food pack donations, soup kitchen donations, and anaerobic digestion, since this is sort of prominent way of treating food waste here in Uppsala. And so I looked at the processes, this LCA, and calculated the impacts. And then we also did a substitution in a system expansion where we considered what was substituted by the food they received as donation and what was then substituted by the products from the anaerobic digestion. So biogas was substituting for fossil fuels and mineral fertilizers. But then we also considered the rebound effect, which was very interesting. And here are the results. Now I'm showing the global warming potential. But in most cases, well, first of all net results, which is the green little square, were negative. So all of these options were giving mitigative emissions or negative emissions, so mitigating environmental impacts. But the food pack center was outperforming, for example, anaerobic digestion almost fourfold. And you can also see that the largest effect came from the substitution. And there were also considerable rebound effect, which is the pink part of the bars, when it came to food donations. So for the food pack center, it was somewhere around 30%, and for the soup kitchen, somewhere around 6%. So that was quite considerable. But despite that, they were doing well. Right. So, and then economic benefits of surplus food donation. So I was looking at the benefits that were created by this activity, and also the investments they needed to take in to be able to do these donations. And I saw that the food bag donations turned out positive. They had a positive result, whereas the soup kitchen was running on negative. And overall, they were totally dependent on getting food for free. They were dependent on getting vehicle and the location where they were acting, and yeah, everything they just needed. They didn't really have, I mean, it's a non-profit organization, simply. And recipients obtained the greatest benefits. They, for example, accrued savings, so 165 crowns at the time per week, which was then relieving their personal economies. They were able to buy additional food. They were able to buy healthcare products. They were able to buy clothing and so on, toys for their children. And then the retailers were basically losers in this. So they were basically getting nothing. Okay, social recipient value. So considering that the food in the food bags, that's what I looked at mostly. So it was perishable, it was to a high degree vegetables, fruit, berries, some meat, and some dairy, always. And because of this, it was very balanced in terms of macronutrients. I mean now protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and also high in nutrients like vitamins and minerals. And then we also always interested in, okay, how about dietary fiber? It's difficult to get enough. The food bags were very high in dietary fiber and low in sugar and salt, which is often a concern that whether we are donating unhealthy foods, but this is not something I saw in these results. And also the fat quality, balanced and good. Receiving food donations relieved their food insecurity, but it did not make them food secure. And this is not so funny when you see that the one content of one food bag was enough energy for adult person for 4 days. And most of the recipients were more than one person's households. So it had a relieving effect. Okay, now we are leaving food donations behind and we are moving on to school meals. And here we wanted to look at so-called unpopular meals versus popular meals, and whether, because there was and maybe still is a myth that the popular meals are causing more food waste than unpopular, and therefore they're a bit afraid of serving popular meals. So we wanted to look into this, and since menus are consisting several options, we could not necessarily have like days with only popular or unpopular. So it was a little bit like sorting. But anyway, we were able to sort mixed menu days where you had both vegetarian and non-vegetarian meals in unpopular and popular and both categories. And we could see that the popular option days generated basically less plate waste. And the same was true for vegetarian days when only vegetarian meal options were served. So I forgot to mention it was minus 11% for plate waste. And for the vegetarian menu, it was minus 19%. So quite a lot less waste. So what do we, it's perfectly fine to serve vegetarian food as long as they're nutritious and popular, right? And then we were testing other ways of reducing plate waste in school, because this is important. It's important that children eat the food. And we were testing plate waste tracker, which is you have a scale, you have your trash bin where children scrape their plates, and then you have a tablet showing the amount of waste. And it is communicating to that person who is wasting, to nobody else. It's when you are behaving well, you don't notice anything. And this seemed to have, and we were looking in this also long-term result, not just short intervention time, but really up to 15 months after we started this. And we could see that the reduction was around 20%, even long-term. Then and we didn't see any changes in the control group. We also had. Then we also tested pedagogic meals. And what is that then? That is, so the school lunches are integrated into the curricula, and teachers are sitting and eating with the pupils. And also, like before the lunch and after lunch, they would integrate topics like nutrition or food waste reduction, topics like that into the curricula. And we did this for 10 weeks. Unfortunately, we couldn't see any significant reduction, short-term or long-term. However, part of the participants were using plate waste tracker, and there we could see a long-term reduction of 14%. So then we were doing a little study on plate waste, composition analysis. So getting hands dirty, and we did not really know. I mean, obviously you serve food in schools, but it doesn't get wasted in the same proportions. And we didn't really know what gets actually wasted. So the inner circle is showing in amounts. The green color is indicating staple foods. So most of the plate waste, somewhere around 60%, was potatoes, rice, pasta. And then the red pies are indicating some kind of animal-based foods: beef, fish, chicken, pork, some cheese. So approximately 10% was animal-based. But then if you look at the outer circle, of course, the climate impact is so much more for the meat-based or animal-based. And on average, now we have a number for the average plate waste, 1 kilo carbon dioxide equivalent per kilo plate waste. So because we did this composition analysis, we also could do nutritional calculations. And we saw that the plate waste was perhaps a little bit surprisingly protein rich. And I thought it was fun because some parents are quite concerned whether the increasingly vegetarian meals are enough, whether they contain enough protein. So even the plate waste was very protein rich. And it was also rich in dietary fiber. And according to some studies, we have seen that school children are not getting enough dietary fiber. And it's not just them, most of us don't, but still. So perhaps if we could increase their intakes, this could help solving that issue. And then having for example, the plate waste tracker in place in these schools that were participating, you could save some nutrient losses. So in energy, 1300 megajoule or 16 kilo protein or 5 kilo dietary fiber per school per year. I also calculated economic loss. So the plate waste was worth 33 crowns per kilo. And then the plate waste tracker case, it had payback time approximately 2 years. So there is certain cost to buy one, and then after saving plate waste, well, it could still be eaten, so, but at least you wouldn't be spending the money in vain. So after 2 years, you would be running on this. Not too bad. Conclusions. The magnitude of food overconsumption was substantial and with a substantial hidden climate cost. And I think it should be addressed as a systemic failure, impacting both human and planetary health. And surplus food redistribution or donation was very effective, with 78% of donated food eaten, due to key success factors such as the hybrid rating model and high acceptance by the recipients. And surplus food donation mitigated environmental impacts to a greater degree than anaerobic digestion, and despite the substantial rebound effects. While this trade-off was also good, it generated social value to the recipients. I don't know what's happening. Oh. Right, and donated surplus food and plate waste from school canteens was nutritious and offering significant nutrient savings when salvaged for human consumption. And however, despite these benefits, I think food donation should be regarded as a short-term solution because it does not really solve the root causes. It does not solve the underlying cause of food waste nor food insecurity. And then meal planning and plate waste tracker resulted in long-term plate waste reductions around 20% and could be considered best practice even because they're cost effective and they have the ability to positively impact food intakes of children, which could be also crucial in preventing metabolic food waste. And for the future, policy action on metabolic food waste, please. I think now I looked at it in Sweden, but it is a global issue. So I don't imagine it's very different anywhere else. And this is going unnoticed. And we are not currently solving the issue as a health issue. We have been trying for decades, but the prevalence keeps increasing. So we need to highlight the climate cost for policymakers, perhaps. And then also something I burn for is the systemic food waste. And in this case, at the retailer consumer nexus. Surplus food donation seems to give a lot of benefits, but it's not addressing the root causes. And I think we should really look at the root causes and why we have that waste in the first place, which is going to be tough. And also implementing food waste prevention measures in school canteens. The plate waste tracker showed great long-term potential. Now we know that kind of. It would be interesting just to confirm whether it really does increase the intake and whether, or what happens. Do they reduce production? And also, because it is communicating to the waste makers. So we could be testing maybe different kind of messages. Could we somehow impact these waste makers with the help of this? Oh, that was it for me. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Niina. So I'll give the floor to the opponent, please.
I will. Would you mind me sitting down just so I can move the slides without us changing over too many things? 1 second and I'll turn my microphone. 1, 2, 1, 2. Is that okay for everybody? Is that okay online? Thumbs up. Thank you. Celebrate what you have done. So, hello everybody. Hello, it is lovely to be here with you today. My name is Dr Christian Reynolds. I'm from the Centre for Food Policy at City University of London. I've had a very varied background over my time. So I have a PhD in applied mathematics, but I now work more in policy, and I've done a bit of life cycle analysis and a few other things. I apologize for my hybrid Australian-British accent. If anything I say is incorrect or I am going too fast because I've had coffee, tell me. And I want this to be fun for you. This is an amazing thing you have done today, and you have done over these last 4 years. And so let us have fun and let us enjoy this. Okay? Just to say, I work on sustainable food. I work on food waste. I support different government departments. This is slightly for you. You probably know who I am already, but just this is why I will be asking certain questions and may focus in certain areas. I am the lead for food systems at the Nutrition Society, which is the learned society for the UK for nutrition. I also work in the sustainability group for the Institute for Food Science and Technology in terms of food processing and things. And I am part of a knowledge exchange group called Take a Bite Out of Climate Change, which produces a community-based activities such as top trump cards or computer games about dietary shifts. And so I have hopefully a good selection of different things. Your supervisors were saying that the Routledge Handbook of Food Waste is part of different classes here, but I have other bits and pieces as well. But that's enough about me. Let's first congratulate you and say the time spent in your thesis, according to LinkedIn, because it's not written in your thesis, was August 2020 to April 2024. That's kind of when you said you were pretty much wrapped up. So you did all of this within 4 years. That's, and this is me being Australian, bloody amazing. Like, it's an amazing piece of work you've brought there. This thesis was completed under 4 years. That's amazing. You already have 5 peer-reviewed thesis publications.
Yes.
That's amazing. You provide findings on overconsumption and metabolic food waste, paper 1. You then have surplus food donation papers 2 and 3, and then school plate waste 4, 5, and 6. Right. Your outputs have already had an impact in the academy. Have you Googled yourself? Sometimes, not really. Well, this may be slightly embarrassing. I have Googled and gone through every one of your citations.
Okay.
So that is what the next 15 minutes are going to be about slightly. I also just want to let us celebrate. You are your friends, your family. You have done an amazing piece of work here. But I also have, so this is the fun bit. We're going to be serious a little bit later. I also want to highlight that other bits of work you contributed to in this time. So you list these within your thesis. I know you have been active outside of this, and there are other things as well as this, even though they are not listed within the thesis. So overall, reading this thesis, it feels like you have been supported by a very wide community. Yes. And I will come back to that later. But again, just acknowledging in the room, you have people here who have been supporting you as well. So for the next 15-ish minutes, hopefully not too much more, because you'll all get bored otherwise, I want to talk about the impact your thesis has had already, to bring in that broad conceptualization. And then I'll conclude with some of my reflections on how your work speaks to my work personally, and the work of my PhD students, which isn't published yet. But I think we should have a conversation in terms of where you are going after this. So in a traditional English Viva setting, and in a English Viva, your last chapter would be even more where you are planning to go. And I feel we could have that sort of discussion at the end within the questioning, if that helps you. So these are the 6 different chapters of her thesis, and I'm going to go through them one by one or in groups, just highlighting the different citations. This isn't supposed to be embarrassing. This is just highlighting the work that you have done there. So firstly, we have the climate impact of excess food intake. And this is a really interesting one, which you may or may not have seen so far. So Shi et al. 2024, there's also a screen over here, but this is much bigger. They use Niina's work, quote it, and expand it to China. They take your methodologies, they take a lot of your different things and expand it and use the Chinese data sets. And what's really interesting, comparing Sweden to China, is China has much more obesity in terms of population spread and a much bigger population. So there is another scholar who has just looked at the city of Shanghai. This isn't this paper, this is me going off script slightly.
Mm.
But she looked at just the waste of the city of Shanghai,
Mm.
and that is more than the waste of the UK. So in terms of she's reduced the city of Shanghai's food waste through interventions, and that has, done a massive reduction, which is better than what RAP have done entirety in the UK. So China is a different figure, but they've then looked at both the dietary structure of China and how that's leading to obesity and the excess food intake for obese and overweight groups. And it's fascinating seeing how your methodologies have been adapted within this paper. Have you been aware of this before? No, this is hot off the press. But again, really similar results in terms of you've not put a distribution graph, this top right-hand one here, within your paper. And I would have loved to see, or if we could bring up the R or Python or however you've coded your results up and look at your distributions for how you estimated. It's really interesting seeing household food waste a day and comparing that to excess food waste, which again is a higher level of energy expenditure there. So in Sweden, it's flipped, but it's still quite high in terms of carbon footprint, etc. But it's a really nice highlight showing these methodologies. And you were one of the first people to talk about this and produce a work, and others are now adapting to it. So a really exciting paper there. Vinci then has done also the same in Italy. So again, they used more of an input-output approach to some of this, but doing a similar style. So not using your methods per se, but using your results and comparing to. And they found, so in your update, it's 1%, correct, of Sweden's footprint is 1 or 2%?
1 or 2.
Around, it's in that ballpark. They found 3 for Italy.
Okay.
So 3% of, they call it agribusiness sector, but it's the food sector based on their assumptions, were linked to this overconsumption. But interestingly, from a nutritional perspective as well, they then are looking at the overconsumption of meat and sugar specifically within their paper, which again is a different tack. Right. Each of us have these different choices. And then they did a social LCA, which you come to much later for a different topic, but they did an overconsumption social LCA. Again, similar methodologies, different parts of this big problem. So again, you're right at the cutting edge and have inspired others with this. There's then other papers that have been using you as this piece of work as justification for why they start doing their piece of work. So Colombo, you know quite well, probably personally, maybe. So Barbara Colombo, so you cite her quite a bit, but she has been doing some modeling work on salt and sugar taxes in the UK population. And she uses your work as a kind of basis to show sugar taxes are needed, and this would be an interesting way to go. Likewise, Traska in Romania has been using your work as evidence of waste and diet and how they could be used together, so dietary change and resources change. I'll send you the slides afterwards, don't worry. Okay. And then Mazak in the Finnish population, looking at overconsumption, and basically they compared theirs there. So they were looking at diet quality indicators, but used your work to say, well, the future research avenue is obviously if we start combining overconsumption with dietary indicators, exactly as you said. And then finally, Ndambo used yours to look at a city level in Malawi, which is an amazing context to think you are having this global impact. This is in Malawi, in Finland, in Romania, in the UK, in China, just from your first paper. Shall we keep going? So this is my own work from back in 2019, and you probably didn't pick this up because we don't call it overconsumption at all. So we put this paper out there just looking at the food system in terms of bread. You've probably not seen this before. No, it's not well cited. We didn't do a good thing of advertising it, but we looked at wheat to loaf and then beyond loaf. We call this food chain efficiency or inefficiency. And so we had a biological scientist go in and say, what are the actual efficiency of going from a photon from the sun into the wheat, looking at how the plant and breeding works in terms of what are the efficiencies of energy from the sun to energy into our mouths and out the other side. And so the last one, DE, is dietary efficiency. So that's where I looked at overconsumption, and consumption efficiency was cooking waste, RE, retail efficiency. So you could see where the different efficiencies were within the chain. And so this was back in 2019, but I follow a very similar assumption set to what you were doing there. Though when we come to questions, it will be interesting to talk through some of the choices I didn't make and ask why you didn't make those choices either, because I think that will be a nice thing. But again, I think the stigmatization that you highlight in your work is totally correct in terms of obesity as a personalized health issue. Yet I think in your thesis and the wider community are talking about system solutions to individual problems because it isn't an individual choice. We are in a system that's forcing us to overconsume as well. So you make that point very clearly in your paper and in your main thesis. Is this going too fast? Is this okay?
Yes.
Okay. So on to the next two. So this is around your food bank, food donation, rebound effect work. So there's a piece in Nature Food. Have you seen Hegwood? No? So Hegwood 2023 rebound effects could offset more than half avoided food loss and waste.
I've seen that.
You've seen that. We all saw it. We all swore. We wish we'd done this one. But she cites you. And again, she compares her results to your results in terms of environmental and food security impacts and rebound effects linked to avoided food waste. And so it links very well to your looking at a very specific part of the chain. She sets it up very nicely in this wider aspect and uniquely uses that global data, which we'll come to that global data later on again. Just saying your work is being projected and put into these high impact studies, which is brilliant. Likewise, again, the Chinese scholarly community has picked it up and comparing your work to Chinese food donation policy, which is very, very new. They've not set up the infrastructure compared to Europe yet. We then have another Weber in Sweden, which includes co-authors from your supervisory team, links to clean logistics, to better donation outcomes. Again, your supervisory team, and you cite it. So there's a very nice thing in terms of you citing within your supervisory group. There is a community of scholarship you are part of, and you are reflecting and discussing internally within the discussion sections of your papers. And then finally, Aiken talks about this in terms of different food waste policies in the US context. So again, a really interesting setting of food donation work and how that operates in the US versus what it has here. And I will come to some questions about these sorts of different contextual issues later. We then have similarly looking at this in terms of Lithuania, again in China, and again in Germany, in terms of both your life cycle analysis impacts, or say in China, I thought it was interesting, using the evidence of the food donation and also the food, the soup kitchen, using them to show you can have, I guess, profit or other people being employed in rural economies or developing economies in the food donation sector. It all doesn't have to just be focusing on farm jobs, which I think is not explored in your work, but is a really fascinating way to think about food rescue being part of a wider food systems answer to both employment and regional redevelopment, which again, really fascinating. There was Cuaso then uses that for looking in the state of Panara in Brazil, and looking and comparing Swedish and Brazilian food waste donation operations using your material flow analysis and comparing tonnages. And then finally, and I think this is just an amazing paper, Srozmek, apologies for mispronunciation there, uses your environment, economic and social framework. So they take different frameworks and adapt multiple frameworks, and yours is one of the ones they choose to then look at a Polish cultural heritage. So they're using your analysis framework on a totally different intervention style. But again, just you've had some very amazing and varied impact within the literature. Just highlighting, you cite my work here, the 2015 paper that I do in Australia. Let's be honest, it was a crude study. There was not the data available in 2015 as there was now. You draw the right conclusions from it and you gloss over the fault. So thank you very much. Next, because I'm aware we're speeding along here. Is this going an okay pace for you? Yeah. Let's look in terms of your one paper from the three that is out in terms of goal conflicts in menu planning in Swedish school catering. So the other two are too fresh, as it were, to have much engagement or still under peer review. So this is very exciting. So Liselle Marty, the second one here, she's got this amazing piece of work in French canteens and schools, as well as in French university canteens, looking at vegetarian priming and vegetarian menu choice. And she's got some amazing work coming out, and I think there will be a very nice collaboration there in the future. But Dami as well, they both use your work to look at the I guess, success and failure of vegetarian meals in French cuisine, and saying, why is it working in Sweden when in France, the vegetarian meals, there is a cultural resistance? And is it due to families? Is it due to other things are happening? And so they use you as a comparison tool.
Okay.
Sorry, use your paper, I should say. But again, it's fascinating to look at the culture here. And if there were other studies, I think, looking more at the Nordic food culture versus French others, it's really interesting to see what's working because of the cultural perspective in terms of school meal acceptance and what that means for food waste. Likewise, it's been used in Turkey. And they then also use in a nutrient density index, waste amount, food cost, water, carbon footprint. They do a lot of your different methodologies over your 3 papers and try and cram it into one. And it's a very complicated, hard to read paper because of that. And I think you made a very wise decision to split and keep your narrative slightly separate there. Then again, Lassen looked at your work comparing it to Danish municipalities, and it's been looked at in terms of guidance in New Zealand, Denmark, and Tasmania, Australia, using your work to say what is the best practice that we could have in terms of designing better menus for our public food procurement, which is quite an exciting thing in terms of this is academia, but that's definitely going to influence policy in multiple countries, hopefully, touch wood. So again, great to see your evidence base is being created there. And this is the final one of them, but this is just a really charming paper about Swedish food history. And they use your work. Have you been aware of this at all? Prell and Spore 2024. So he looks at the Swedish school meals over time and looks at how, I guess, if from outside, terrible they may have been back in the day, or the constraining, what used to be the food culture, and uses your example to show there is now vegetarian meals. There is now choice on the menu. The buffet style is different to how it has been in the past. And it uses your paper as a way to show that dramatic change over time, which is a quite nice way to highlight that different change. Now, your final paper. This is something very close to my home heart. So I'm going to talk about some of my research here before we go into some wider things. So this has probably not come up in your readings. So in 2017 to 2020, so I worked half at the University of Sheffield and half for an organization called WRAP, the Waste Resources Action Program, which is a food waste charity. And at that, my role at WRAP was as a specialist on healthy, sustainable eating and food waste. And so I was making sure our healthy eating programs considered food waste and our food waste programs considered healthy eating. You probably know about that. And so we, as part of a London intervention in multiple parts of London, we did a schools intervention in 24 different schools, and we designed a lesson plan for food waste, prevention, food waste, recycling, and healthy eating. So we designed a lesson plan. This has never been in the academic literature, but it was really interesting to see curriculum designed and implemented, and seeing that pupils got healthier eating messages. They got food waste recycling better, all of these different sorts of things. But in the long term, something happens. And that's the catch. And I think you bring that up there and you start to, and we can have a conversation about short-term versus long-term intervention later. In the slightly longer of my term, post-2020, I have a PhD student currently called Kim Smith. And I think she would love to talk to you about your intervention. So back in 2022, she did a master's thesis looking at primary school curriculums across 11 countries and looking at how primary school curriculums talk about food skills. And that was very interesting. But lately, she's been looking at primary school curriculums and how they look at sustainability. So she had a presentation in February 2024, and I've stolen a few slides from that. So this is all Kim's work. But she uses a saparai, a kind of food sensory education. That's her perspective. And she also looks at food literacy. So thinking about confidence and empowerment with food, how do you integrate that into the curriculum? Is it in nutrition? Is it in cooking? How do you integrate joy and meaning in food into your curriculum? And how you integrate sustainability into that? And so she used this framework and tried to see what the literature said, who's been looking at it. And so she did a systematized literature review from 2018 to 2023 across 3 different databases and found 63 papers. But and I think this is the pertinent thing to you. She found one paper which mentions sustainability in curriculum. It's such an evolving area. And as you know, this paper for you is under review currently, and it will be an advancement to the field because sustainability integration into curriculum, there's nobody publishing there yet. It's such an exciting area to be there. But again, it's how you integrate into the different curriculums, and do the teachers have time, as we'll probably discuss later. And so, only one sustainability topic there. But hands-on is the way for the education that she found in terms of best practice, as you've demonstrated in yours. And so there is this definite gap there, which will be exciting to explore in our questions. So, as you can see, hopefully, your thesis has already had an exceptional impact, considering you've done this within 4 years. You've had a global reach. I want to conclude just by probably throwing some curveballs here, which you may want to think about, and how this links to my own current research areas. So, as you highlighted in your talk, it's within a hierarchy. And as you highlighted, we need multiple different solutions around prevention, diversion, and reduction. And you mentioned SDG 12.3, which is about halving food loss and waste, though each place in the world is considering what halving food loss and waste means to be slightly different. And also, action is needed on different food products at different places. And you highlight that in terms of breaking it down and doing compositional analysis. This is a report I did for the World Bank back. It was released in February 2020, so nobody ever saw it. But it was a lot of work in terms of looking at different food items across the value chain, breaking it down to where the waste was, doing life cycle analysis of those different impacts, and then doing rebound effects. And I'll come to that in a second. But this led on to doing different countries' policy outcomes. So I've been working for the last 4 years on presenting these are the different things that you could do as a policymaker. So this is called the path to half, which rhymes. Victoria in Australia really likes rhyming titles, apparently. And they said, these are the 25 things we will do to make sure we get to 50% food waste reduction. And I've highlighted on here the 2 that you speak to in your research, and you're providing a better evidence base. You're looking at sustainable guidelines for catering, and you're also doing food rescue actions across the supply chain. You're providing a better evidence base for that. Likewise, the Welsh Food Loss and Waste Roadmap, they highlight food redistribution as a key one of their 13 different solutions they need to do to meet SDG 12.3. The Australian food waste strategy, this was the one I worked most heavily on, and this was over lockdown I started doing this. We proposed 41 different measures, and they selected only 13. And if I'm honest, they're not going to actually get to SDG 12.3. They've done it too late. But within it, they are there. Look at that waterfall where the arrow is. That's food donation there. Okay. So it's a huge part of getting food donation right. And I think we're going to hopefully have an interesting discussion around food donation and why it is such an important thing for both reduction and how we make it prevention as well, as you've highlighted in terms of rebound. And then ReFed, which I'm sure you're aware of, is the big US database, which had 73 different things they say any US state or government could do. And within that, there's food rescue as well, though it is a much smaller piece from the wider. And they are definitely putting all their eggs in the recycle anything anaerobic digestion basket. Yeah. So just highlighting, you've provided that evidence base, which is so needed. And for me, and the area that I now teach is policy coherence. So saying we need to have things that are not siloed. We need to be improving environment, improving economy, providing health outcomes and social outcomes. And because of your social assessment, there's a great, you provided evidence on all of these different sorts of things. And it's being able to provide, the next step is providing that evidence to the right sort of policymaker or decision maker, showing that. You don't have to do that in a thesis, but that's the difficult bit, which is the next bit. So the results presented in this thesis help us with this evidence about effectiveness of these 3 different plate waste and food donation programs, and you provide some strong evidence around obesity, and you've become a core foundational text already in that obesity. So this can help us balance waste reduction and diversion with environment, social, economic, and health goals. One final thought before I finish. So hopefully you're not all getting too tired. So this is from the World Bank report. We call this a cascading effect, not a rebound effect. So this is where if you waste food at different points or you produce the food waste, what happens to that food? Is it going to be sold to someone else and wasted? Or is it going, so if you stop food waste at consumption level, does somebody else buy that food waste and still waste it? Or if you stop it at farm, what happens to that farmland? Do the farmers grow something else? So we had to think and create a dynamic model to actually start thinking about, I prefer the term ripple effects, rippling through the economy. The head was waterfall or cascading effects. He was the boss of the project. But this, in a way, complements your rebound effects because you only did first order rebounds. You didn't look down the cascade. And I think you have to think of them both. And I think we should be thinking about that. So you can see here in the colored one, the left-hand side of the graph, that's looking at the stages and if it reduces or increases in food waste. So if you actually reduce consumption food waste, there is actually still an increase in some other parts of food loss and waste because other people might go and buy it still. So it's available from the retailer still, so other people might buy it and waste a fraction of it. So there's this interesting order. So you can, but again, you can see in the right-hand one, figure 27, which is the gray one, there is a 50% reduction in food waste actually leads to only a 25% reduction overall throughout the system. But it's still the best place to intervene. Again, this model has been slammed, and the rebound effect paper in Nature Food has taken this in a totally different direction and has shown similar results using different methodologies. But I thought I would highlight that as a piece for that. So that's the end. I've gone for 26 minutes, so much longer than I anticipated. But again, I will hand back over to the chair. We'll come to that in the question batteries.
Yes, but I think we can start with the questions before, and then we just have a break in 25 minutes. So please go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because you probably don't want to see the questions at the same time. I have all of your figures in my slide deck. I've copied them all here. So if we want a figure, we can plug back in and talk through it. And everybody at home can see it. Well, everybody here has the thesis and we can flip to the page. But let us begin the questioning. Are you feeling okay? Do you want a drink of water?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Let's both cheers.
Cheers.
Okay. So I've separated this question battery into wider questions which speak to the SLU doctoral requirements and thinking about that, and then paper specific ones. So it may also naturally break there. We will see. Do tell me when we have to break and we can stop at any time. Firstly, again, I congratulate you on a very strong thesis. You and all the people who've supported you should be very, very proud of the work you present here. And I want to stress, I want to make this as fun and enjoyable as possible for you. I'm looking forward to talking for the next half hour, then an hour after that maybe, about the various parts. And first, let's talk broadly. As I said in my presentation, it feels as though a strong community has supported you. Would you like to expand upon that community and who supported you and how they supported you before we continue? I have some follow-up questions if different things happen, but is there anybody you'd like to highlight in that community about, this is in essence talking about your authorship contributions, that sort of thing, but is there anybody else you would like to highlight who may not be in authorship or acknowledgements, etc., before we continue?
Obviously, my family, my husband, who has made it possible, my poor children, who think I work all the time. Yes, I obviously, I am defending this thesis today myself, but I have indeed received a lot of support. Not just from my supervisory group, but I've also been able to work with close colleagues and students, and we have been having a lot of fun doing different kind of research.
Lovely. So could I just ask you to comment? So one of your supervisors, Malfors, is that how you pronounce his surname? Malfors? Sorry, apologies. Could you highlight how does your work build upon his? How is it different?
Well, the difference was perhaps that I took the nutritional views, like that I went a little bit beyond quantification, because he's great in quantification. And then I have my nutritional background, and I'm always thinking in those terms, so social impacts and also the environmental impacts. So taking this sustainability view on what we are trying to reduce, what are the benefits or trade-offs or whatever.
Okay. And so in reading through the thesis started in 2020. Your doctoral work started in 2020, as I've said in the slide deck.
Yep.
You're using data from as far back as 2018, 2019. So when does the data stop being his thesis and start being your data collection?
His thesis.
So, or his papers. Because you cite a few of his papers, and in papers 4, 5, 6, you're using interventions that have been running for your baseline from 2019.
Right. I'm not sure how to answer that.
So what was the baseline data for, sorry, this goes very deep, but it's just wanting to highlight now.
Now we're talking about the school meal.
School meal.
Yes.
Yep. So, but the baseline data for that was 2019 started collection for some parts of your baseline.
Right. I think we even had earlier data. Yes.
Let me just double check. You highlight it back to November 2019 for paper 4, and for paper 6 you have back to 2012. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah.
So how much of the baseline data did you collect, I guess is the question.
Okay. It is work of Christopher to collect that. Yes.
Okay, thank you. The other question I would have, so this is usually not within a thesis, but useful at the start, is to understand what were the wider conferences, knowledge exchange, media, what else did you do during your PhD? Did you go and talk at a science festival, at a school about your work? Were there any fun things you did that are not shown there?
Yes, there were. Obviously COVID pandemic was ongoing, so the first couple of years were boring in that sense. That was not much traveling. But then somewhere around, was it 22? I did my first conference in Tampere in Finland, and that was for conference for more like marketing and economics, and I was really interested in that because it's not my strength. So and we have close colleagues there interested in food waste. So that was very fun and eye-opening. And also last year I attended this largest conference, food waste conference, or not food waste, waste conference in Sardinia.
You went to the Sardinia?
Yes.
Oh, I'm so envious.
It was really fun.
So those were the only 2 conferences?
Yes.
Okay. And did you do any so that was marketing as another discipline you engaged with, and then waste studies, would you say, or waste and recycling, waste management?
Yes.
Okay, so just again, it's never usually highlighted, but I feel it's useful to say you've engaged with these other communities, because you don't ever find that information within the Viva, in the thesis, but it's useful to discuss and understand. So out of interest, where do you place yourself in terms of scholarship? What is your tribe, or many tribes? Where do you see yourself?
It's hard to place me in one. So obviously food waste prevention, but then with some kind of twist towards sustainable nutrition and somewhere there. And I do like to look at all the dimensions of sustainability. And I'm thinking the hierarchy, I want to be on top. But policy would be so interesting. I would really... It's something I don't know much about yet. I'm just starting to understand that it's so important if we want to change anything.
And so have you done much engagement with policy?
Not
Okay,
really,
all
but
good.
it's like
And
the
next,
kind of direction.
okay.
Interesting.
So final of the generic questions. You started to answer this.
Mhm.
Could you just reflect upon how COVID has impacted your thesis? What might be useful?
Right, yes.
Is,
Well, of course, it gave us some challenges for in terms of data collection and
Mhm.
so on. We did manage at the end, but it did put some delays, some so there were fewer participants than we were hoping for
Mhm.
example, in some of the studies.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, we work with what you get,
Mhm.
and we still managed to get data, so
Yep.
it wasn't too bad.
So I drew up this timeline from what I could understand of your thesis. So paper one was in 2020?
Paper one, I worked on 2020.
So that was very data heavy because of because of COVID, I'm guessing.
Right, because it was statistical
Yeah,
data.
it was all statistical
Yeah,
data. You could get
so
it. You did not
it
have
was
to go and
easy.
do
It
something.
was I was just working home and doing it, and I had long COVID.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. So paper two started in August 2020 data collection.
Mm.
I couldn't find dates for paper three in your thesis, which I'm assuming it's the same data set as 2022, as that paper two.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Paper four, you did your quant 2019 to September 2021, and then your qual 2022. Paper five is 2023 2-week spring. Is that correct?
Probably.
All good, that's fine. And paper six, which is where I wanted to understand the baseline data
Yes.
collection versus the intervention data collection and
Yeah.
who did what, as it were.
So these data collections have been ongoing,
Mhm.
and I mean, I didn't have to do anything.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
was lucky to have that data available. The same for paper four. I
Yeah.
think.
So this
Yeah.
means the interventions in Sweden,
Yeah.
were they set up in 2020 before you came on, or did you start assisting with the interventions in Sweden?
Yes. So first I did, because first I worked on no, it was simultaneously working.
Yeah. No,
here and there. Yeah.
because I think so. It was just the Swedish interventions for
Yeah.
paper six. Did those start all at the same
Yes.
time? So,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Wow.
yes,
Okay.
it's- yeah.
A lot
Puzzle.
of things, a lot of plates spinning. So that seems about accurate then for your timeline and the impact of COVID. There was recruitment issues. You had to do a data heavy
Mainly for
chapter.
for both case studies actually.
Okay.
Yes, but we did much better than some of our colleagues outside Sweden because schools were open here. We didn't have lockdown.
Lovely, thank you. Right. The other, how are we doing for time? One more? 15 minutes? Okay. The other thing, just broadly before we begin. So in some of your papers, you list ethical approval. In others, you say you do not. So in terms of clarification, you do not need it. So in terms of clarification, would you be able to highlight what sections had ethical approval, or did you lead the ethical approval process, or was it others within your research team leading that ethical approval process?
I'm not sure we had ethical approval.
So for these interventions in paper six, for instance, did they need ethical approval
No.
because those were interventions?
No,
So
because we were measuring or quantifying. You're thinking maybe the pedagogic meals, right? Because it was the teachers doing it for us. We were not involved. So we gave instructions to the teachers, but we were not in contact with the children.
So in Sweden, when does ethics need to be applied for?
When you are collecting sensitive data, basically.
Okay, so in the UK, it's when you collect any data with a public participant.
Right.
So this is why I'm asking this question.
Right, yes.
So if I did any of your survey work, all of those would have to have ethical approval.
Yeah, here it is. Or at the time, it is a little bit maybe evolving, but the rules are that if you are collecting sensitive data, and we did check that with the SLU lawyer.
Okay,
beforehand.
so you did a check there.
Yes.
Lovely. I'm going to, this is a hard one. So you have a beautiful thesis there. When you get to this stage, typically you've had some failed experiments as well, or you've had the tough bits, or there are hard bits. So within your different papers, shall I bring back up the timeline again? What were the big failures? What were the big barriers? What just didn't work in your thesis? Because when you present it, it all looks lovely, but I'm sure there were nights of tearing your hair. And I think this is a chance to just reflect and go, the research project is not one direction. Where were the difficulties? Where were the failures?
So difficulties were, obviously we had agreed to collect data from the city mission, for example, about the donations. And they were extremely busy people. And we obviously could not be their priority number one. They had busy operations. So it was not the matter that I was not going to get the data. I just didn't know if I would. But I sort of had to trust it and wait for it. And so that was in a way hard because it took some time. And at the end, it was fine. But I did not know for sure. So in a way, yeah, it turned out fine. And and also the same for the schools. So for the pedagogic meals, we were hoping for more schools.
How many was your original target?
It was either 10 or 12.
And you got 8?
We got 5 for the pedagogic meals.
5. And then
and the teachers, I mean, it was COVID. That was really like taking a toll on their resources. And I mean, you can't force. So those were the toughest ones. Then whenever I run into some problem, I run to my supervisor who he's good at simplifying things that I overcomplicate. So often there was, so often there were solutions that I thought were maybe thing. But so those were probably the toughest.
So recruitment, getting the data, COVID was a barrier.
Was a barrier. And obviously,
Okay, that's good. 1 second while my computer loads. So let us just have a step back from your results. So in your presentation, you talked through your 3 big kind of things that you were saying. Is there anything in particular you would like to highlight for local, national, or global implication that you would like to highlight from that bigger section? So what are the takeaways, as it were, for someone working in a local government around schools or national government or at a global level? Are there takeaways different levels of government should be thinking about?
It's a nice question. I have not thought about it yet, but yes, the work I've been doing, for example, with the school meals, in a way you could put those things into practice, I imagine, quite easily. Well, there are certainly barriers, money to purchase scales or whatever, and and then the metabolic food waste, I think, is more on a national level than a local level. But there is a link. I see like it is connected to also school meals. And since we need to work with the food environments for children and for adults. So I'm not sure. I mean, probably you need both levels working on these things. I cannot necessarily say just one.
No, that's fine. And again, if it's not something you've touched on in your thesis, I think it was just wanting to give you space to think about the wider implications for different levels of government within this, because I feel there are definitely different aspects we could go into. Let's go on, because we probably have about 10 minutes before the break. Okay. You have 6 chapters.
Right.
Could you highlight the most important novelties of your thesis? So in my training, as it were, typically the novelties or exciting things are either a methodological novelty, so you're inventing or creating new methods, a theoretical novelty, you're adapting theoretical frameworks, you're creating new theory, or empirical novelty, in terms of you're collecting new data that nobody has collected before or analyzing it in new ways. So to you, out of those 6 different chapters, and again, you don't have to use the exact framework I've said of methods, empirical, theoretical, what are the biggest contributions? So you've highlighted kind of the 3 areas you're contributing, but what are the novelties?
Right. So for the metabolic food waste, I think just developing that, calculating the energy expenditure based on, so we get it over time.
Yep.
I kind of like that and thought it was more interesting than just calculating what is stored in the body. Then for the food donations, the inclusion, well, when I started looking at other studies that have looked at this, they had not really considered the recipients that well. I thought it was often about the people working as volunteers, the donors or the organizations, but very little about the recipients and what were they getting as benefits or how it worked for them.
So your social impact.
Yes, that got me excited. But also the inclusion of the rebound effect in this context felt like something new. And for the plate waste, the long term, and then using this control group, basically, for comparison. Perhaps those are the biggest ones.
So what theoretical novelties do you bring?
Theoretical novelties.
So what were the main theories that you went towards or used to help plan your research?
I haven't thought about it like that.
All good, and that's fine. Different schools do different things differently, but that's fine. Okay. I can talk through a bit about that maybe after the break a bit further. So because you have 6 different papers and your main thing, you have multiple literature reviews. How did you conduct a literature review?
Basically, using, Google search is very good, but also a search machine of our library, and trying to find the latest and trying to find certain keywords.
Were there a time period that you looked within or excluded?
Yeah, I tended to look maybe 10 years, but then I had to also go a little bit beyond, for example, for the metabolic food waste.
Did you use snowball sampling at all?
No.
Okay, so you didn't use citation mining or anything like that?
Not systematically. I did do that myself, perhaps, but not in a systematic way.
So what was your choice to not use a systematic style literature review or scoping review?
Perhaps just that lack of time, kind of.
Okay. So I guess the reason for this is without being systematic, you don't know you've captured everything.
No.
And somebody I felt was missing from your studies was Erica van Herpen.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the works? No? Okay. So maybe after this reading up. So she's done a lot on distributions of food surveys in terms of what people say they have versus compositional data, how much they waste, and looking at how that distributes. And that pairs very nicely with yours, but we can go into that. Likewise, Lucia Secondi, you only referenced her once. Principato, there's nothing from them. Wickstrom, who does a lot, nothing from them, but you know them.
Yes.
Tamara Soma, lots on food rescue, but you only use any of her second author stuff.
Yeah.
So she's Canadian.
Okay.
And Gang Lu from Denmark and China. He's got some amazing different things which would have boosted your quantifications. And so it's just highlighting, again, there are positives and negatives to this.
Yeah.
So it was just understanding what your choices were. And again, time is, you've done a lot of primary research within that time period. Could I ask, you did some life cycle analysis. So what functional units did you prefer to operate in?
Per kilo.
Per kilo?
Yes, yes.
So you do per kilo of food donated in papers 2 and 3, and grams per guest in paper 6.
Oh, right, yeah.
Was there any other functional units you were thinking of operating in or decided not to operate in?
Not really. Okay. No, this was.
So it was just wanting to justify your choices of why you chose per kilo more than anything else.
Per kilo felt intuitively. It was easy to think kilo food. Just, trying to keep it simple. Recently, one of my students chose something else.
Which was?
Which was ton. And for her, that seemed to that.
The scale.
That was easier for her to get her head around. But I had difficulty. So when I was reading, so it was perhaps a personal preference, but also that I did see others that had used it as well. So.
Because you were doing nutritional analysis, had you considered kilocalorie as your functional unit? Or calorie as your functional unit? So per calorie, per kilocalorie.
Usually kilocalories, but then I have used others as well.
Well, why was that one not used within any of your results if you had done the nutritional composition analysis?
How do you mean?
So you could have presented all your results in terms of calorie. So per calorie eaten. So you could have presented all of your things as that. Was there any reason that was not considered from your nutritional background?
Right. I just didn't think of it.
Yeah,
to be honest.
Yeah. And likewise, you considered per gram when we eat meals.
Yeah.
And in papers 2 and 3, was there any reason you didn't think about using meals as the actual primary unit itself? So per serving rather than.
Right. It could have been possible. But I don't know. I don't know.
All fine. Again, these are different choices we make, and we've made them over 4 years. And it's very hard to go back and go, why did I do this at the time? But it's considering those different aspects. 5 minutes, or do we have time? Do we break now?
5 minutes is better than go on for 5 minutes. It depends.
Let's break now if you want. Just in terms of, I'm aware we've gone pretty intense. Is this going okay?
Yes.
Having fun?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
You guys ready for more after a comfort break? Okay. Right. So where we got to last time was looking at functional units and discussing just kind of your choice of functional units. We'll come back to that.
I was just thinking while I was
sitting. Okay.
Sometimes I need some time. But also for the comparability with other studies, that could be important point to stick with some that has been used previously in similar studies. Because it can be so difficult sometimes to compare study results.
Definitely. It's a very useful thing for that meta-analysis or evidence base. We can talk about my views afterwards. This is your moment right now. So you mentioned difficulties of recruitment in some of your studies. Could we just discuss your sample sizes and your data quality? So are you happy overall reflection on your sample sizes throughout your papers?
Yes, and I'm happy with I'm happy that we got what we got. And obviously you would like to have more, but the reality is not what you want often. So yeah, and in this field, it is often difficult to get large samples. So kind of have to work with what we get.
Yep. So do you feel your data are robust currently?
To a certain degree, but then there are certainly uncertainties. So to a certain degree, and then we need more studies.
So did you perform power calculations
Oh,
for
yes.
any of, so you,
Oh, yes,
okay, just
I
none of
did.
that's in the text in terms of what your power calculations were for
No,
uncertainty?
because I mean, I did, when I started my first food donation study, I did about power calculation because I was freshly graduated from
Beautiful.
Karolinska Institute. And
That's
had
best
learned all this.
practice, good.
Yes.
So what was the power calculation then?
How many participants I would need, and I would need all of them basically.
So
and
how many was that?
That was 240, maybe 8.
And you got 50 something.
A little bit more.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry.
We'll come to that
but
later. No,
okay.
yeah, you got about 25%.
Yeah.
And so it's not. So this is. Does that mean this? Some of the study is underpowered, then, as it were?
Yeah, I mean.
But it's with the sample size of 250. You know, you're getting all of that's a hard thing to do in terms of these sorts of things.
It just wasn't possible.
So does that mean your standard error on some of your data is going to be wider, or yeah? We'll come to talking about how you did that in your sensitivity analysis later. So you did use power calculations. It was just not mentioned in the thesis.
Yes, but I did it for my own sake, and then
Okay.
I had to sort of put it aside because I realized that in this field it wasn't possible in this case study, at least.
For your, well, this I guess goes back to sorry again, pronunciation of surname. For the menu items in your later studies, looking at number of menu categories or for good versus popular versus unpopular menus, did you do a power calculation just in terms of the number of data points you would need for robustness?
No.
Okay. Moving on, you mentioned long-term impact as a novelty. You mentioned it in terms of things you're proud of. So how did you settle on 15 months?
Again, you sort of got that data, and
as in you got but you must have decided, let's sample again at 15 months. Not that this was the opportunity.
We were taking continuous measurements, so we were collecting.
So you have measurements throughout, and you've chosen one time point to present.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So you actually have time points to them throughout, and they're not presented in this thesis. No, just confirming what you've just said.
No.
So how many time points do you have?
Time points meaning measurements.
Yeah.
I think we have a little table there indicating the amount of each.
So this would this be in 4, 5, or 6?
Now I'm talking about 6.
You're talking in 6.
Yes.
Okay.
But maybe in the 4 as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. Just in terms of thinking about
Yeah.
time series versus long term versus short term. I can look at. I've got your tables here. Did you look at the literature in terms of what long term meant in food loss and waste, or who's done what in terms of long term interventions previously?
Little bit, and it's not a lot, or what I could see.
So I guess it's just thinking about how you settled on 15 months. If you had this wider time period, why you chose 15?
Well, we were not actually able to collect 15 from everybody, but that was the maximum. And then I think on average it was 1 year.
So that's not in your paper 6. That nuance there, though.
Right. It is in the latest version. But
right. Okay. That's fine. So it's just understanding.
Yes.
I guess I'm asking this question in terms of it could appear that you're p-hacking. You're taking you've not done a statistical test on this result, but you've taken the best possible set of your data and presented your results there.
No.
I know,
Oh.
but you could, if you with all that information you just said to me,
Okay.
that if you were another sort of student, you could have been doing that. You could have went, I've chosen 15 months because that was the best waste reduction in the long term.
Now I
I'm not-
understand why you are pushing on this question.
Yeah,
Yes.
and
Okay.
so
Yeah.
that's why I'm just understanding
yeah.
this, because if it's not in you're saying it's in the latest version with
Yes.
reviewer feedback, but it wasn't there.
Right.
I'm only able to go on what you presented there.
Yeah.
So I guess for me, and I came to this because of my rapid evidence, my review, which was not the best review of the three. There are two other reviews in 2019 which did a better job. I just think I had a better discussion section, if I'm honest. And we were talking about the lack of long-term impact studies.
Yeah.
And it's great that you have done this.
Mm.
The question I have to you, having worked in schools in 2018 to 17 to 2020, what about cohort effects? So you're looking at 6 to 9-year-olds. Surely this means when the next batch come in of children, if you're over 15 months, you've had another class through, or maybe even 2 classes who have not had your intervention on them.
Right.
How are you mitigating that?
Right. So for the plate waste tracker, that is still there,
Right.
having an impact continuously.
And those are the ones you've had the long-term monitoring versus the pedagogic meals, which you did not have as much.
This was only a 10-week intervention.
And you weren't able to do the long term. But you at least had, a larger sample size across multiple countries.
Right.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful clarification. But you can see why I was asking in terms of long term and why you chose those 15 months. So this leads me to another question, which is you mentioned 250 people at your soup kitchen. Sorry, at your veg bag donation, and Soup Kitchen had, we'll come to this, I've moved this up. I shouldn't be doing this is a chapter question, but it's about scalability of all of your solutions and operationalization of these solutions. So this is the big question discussion. Could this actually be expanded in terms of pedagogic meals, plate waste tracker, and the soup kitchens? How big could we go? What is the piece of the puzzle that we could actually be reducing with these?
Right. I think we could go with the waste tracker. I just somehow see it as it could be integrated into a restaurant, really.
Yeah.
Easily. It's a low cost solution. Can you hear me?
Yeah. You guys good? You can hear? Perfect.
Yeah. But the pedagogic meals could be more challenging. I discussed a little bit, and even more in a better version. But it is so much dependent on individual teachers' interest in food waste and their feeling of whether they have extra time to.
Because it is a commitment.
It is a commitment, and they are busy already.
And this is the big thing we found with our intervention. As soon as the teachers were not involved, it collapsed entirely.
Yes, and it is also how the school meals are set up here. So you have they are all under municipality, but they have different departments responsible. So you have different department responsible for the food and the kitchens, and separate one for the teaching.
Okay.
And their communication can be challenging, like agreeing, because they have different.
So within your chapter 5, was that discussed at all? Or because it was about that, is it 5 or 4 was popular meals? 4 was popular meals. Sorry, in the qualitative work of that all the qualitative work at assessing pedagogic meals, was that tension discussed? Because that doesn't come out in your thesis at all.
Oh, yeah.
Like that to me is what I showed you the idea of policy coherence. That's where incoherence happens because of these different competing objectives.
Right.
And you've not really gone into that within your thesis. But very interesting. So it's just if there was data on that, there could be a nice paper there. But again, it's you've highlighted policy was not the area you were wanting to touch on, or it's the next thing. But just thinking
learning step by step.
Yeah. Again, very, very interesting. So you, in terms of scalability, operationalization.
Right. Then earlier I was thinking, yes, I mean, we are getting fantastic results for the surplus food donation. Scalability, why don't we should be, but I'm not so sure anymore. just because I have started to then think about perhaps the more technical side of it, and do we really want to have these kind of solutions, short term versus long term? Because if we do scale up, it could become driving force for food waste or poverty. So
Yep.
I see it more like, okay, we could keep it short term and meanwhile try to really solve the real issues. And I would feel more comfortable.
So as I guess an activist or a citizen within you, your own views are coming through into your research in terms of the trajectory and research. Great. Again, I would love to talk more on that area, but I will stick to the questions we have, but I would love to talk more in terms of operationalization if we had time. So from your scholarship, what do you see as the next big research agenda for food waste studies as a whole? Systemic food waste? So system-driven or long-term food waste occurring?
Yeah, food waste that is built in a system that is sort of serving purpose.
So lock-ins?
Locking, yes.
Okay.
I'm super interested in that.
And what about for metabolic food waste? You can see you're a foundational paper. So where should that go? Or what are the kind of next things that you can see happening there? Or is that's interesting, I've done that now onto other things?
I'm not sure what I could do, but I'm happy to see others are doing something. What you have presented here earlier, that's super exciting. I'm burning for it because I think it is a serious issue and it is causing a lot of suffering and the prevalence is increasing. So I also see the health side, and now I understand also that there is another side, which is the environmental. And I feel like we somehow solve it, but I'm not sure what my role should be.
No, all fine. Just thinking of that broader brush in the last moments before we switch to very much the focus on chapter analysis, as it were. I guess there was an interesting paper that came out of the UK highlighting that we have had 30 years of health obesity policy, and we are fatter and more obese than ever before.
Yeah.
And will environmental knowledge of obesity just continue the stigma of obesity versus will it actually change anything? Or will this will it be a new bullet in the gun to try and fight?
Yeah,
so there is that tension.
Difficult question.
Okay, let's go back to questioning. So, you feeling okay? Have you had a drink of water before we go to chapter questions? So this is me going into, can I replicate what you've done? I need to understand specific things. So let's keep on having fun. You guys okay? Good. Okay, you can follow along now. We're into chapter 1 at the back of the book. Okay, you had 1797 subjects in the risk-Matten data set. Just in terms of there was this number of people, and one of your methodologies was using risk-Matten and the food consumption within that. So the ways they were consuming the food and porting that across. Were any checks done to look at the BMI spread within the risk-Matten dietary survey data versus your other assumption methodology? So how the people and what they were consuming for their BMI versus your assumptions on this is the spread of BMI and the energy needed, and this is therefore the amount of it. No? Okay, just wanting to check. Just because it would be very interesting to say people are consuming this sort of food at this BMI. That would be a nuance to what you were doing, or possibly change the results somewhat of your consumption pattern.
Yeah, it was a difficult one. We were lacking data on the consumption, and then we just went for
the straightforward. Yeah, no, it's exactly the same thing I did for exactly the same reasons, but I had thought through, if I had another month, I could do this. If I had another month, I could do this. And so it was why you made that call when risk-Matten had BMI and it had other sorts of data to use. And it was just because it was the most straightforward type. Okay. So what are the advantages to could you talk about the different sorts of nutrition survey that are possible, please? So what are the types of nutrition data collection that you can have as a nutritionist or food waste practitioner. How do you gather information from participants?
Diaries.
Okay, so food diaries. Are there different sorts of food diary?
I've forgotten all this now. I'm a dietitian, and I should know. Yes, there must be. But okay, I have used 24.
You use a 24-hour
Yeah,
recall and
yeah.
single recall.
Yes.
Would you say in your practice over this, you've used single recall throughout?
Right.
Not 2-day, 24-hour recall, not split 2-day over 2 weeks? Any particular reason you just use 1 day?
Yes, just the burden for the participants.
Yep.
It was
Too much.
That was it. Yeah.
So why not a food frequency questionnaire?
Yeah. Or again, the complexity of this was more straightforward.
Okay.
I was calling them.
You were on the phone to them.
Yes.
And so this
yes.
was a 24-hour recall collected over the phone by yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of misreporting then, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a single phone call?
Misreporting.
Well, recollection.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Well, of course, the one difficulty was the language barrier in some cases. But then.
So that was. What languages were they speaking then? If you think there was a language barrier, or was it accent? Or
okay, they were Swedish.
Yes.
English.
Yes.
In some cases, but then there were also. Well, those were the languages I could speak with them. But the level of
fluency. Okay. And so, what is the method of data collection for Riksmatten then? To bring it back to chapter 1, what did they use in their survey that was your fundamental data?
They have used I think it was web-based survey diary.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was much better conducted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on. So you gather your food waste percentages from, and I'm going to mispronounce this, and it's been a decade of mispronouncing it, and you can correct me afterwards, Gustafsson from 2011, who was FAO. So that is your primary data for food waste allocations.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this data set?
Uncertainties there.
So for those watching at home or just listening, she did a little shake of her head and then said maybe uncertainties. So again, do you want to
for food waste data, right?
Expand on that? Tell me more.
No, but I mean, it was the best data available at the time, I guess.
So in 2020, that's the word. You chose a 2011 data set, which was based on data from 2002 to 2005.
Okay. No.
Again, I've used it. I used it in 2012, but it was only 1 year old then. So again, it was just saying, what are your thoughts on the data?
Right.
No, fine. If you don't want to say any more, that's fine. What does using this 2011 data /2005/2002 data from their primary sources, what does this mean for the robustness of your results?
Well, there could be uncertainties.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay.
I mean,
did you do any checks or simulations or sensitivity analysis for this?
That one was
okay. You mentioned in your presentation it was for the adult population.
Yeah.
Why did you exclude children when childhood obesity is such a
growing? Yeah. I discussed this and I don't know because I actually wanted to.
Okay, so you wanted to at the beginning and somebody said something or you chose simplicity or not leading you, sorry, I didn't.
No, but it came down to some simplicity because it was first study and so on. And we were not really sure what the results were going to be. So
you had to choose some cuts.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll leave that one there for now. But again, it's just an interesting thought in terms of your later papers either are school and things.
Yes,
And so
it
it's an
would have been
obvious
perfect.
narrative you
Yes,
could have
I
taken
know,
throughout. Onto some very deep assumptions here. So you state the most common cooking methods were used in that paper to estimate different LCA impacts, I believe. How the heck did you determine which was the most common? You have no data reference there.
No. This was data from RISE.
Okay.
And I had somebody from RISE helping with that.
Okay. Are they in the acknowledgements or the author list?
Sorry?
Are they in the acknowledgement section or the author list?
They are not co-authors.
Okay.
Or one person is.
Okay.
Sorry, one person. No, two. Sorry.
Okay.
But
So something that has occurred more since 2020, and it's definitely popular now, is ultra-processed food.
Yeah.
And so you start to explore that in your junk food scenario or your discretionary food. I'm just wondering, were any other scenarios thought of at the time and not used, or were the three you proposed for chapter 1 everything?
those were the ones. Yeah.
Okay. If you ever do it again, looking at ultra-processed food or the NOVA classification would be just, it would be a very political paper. But we've done self-reported data, we've done underreporting, lack of reporting foods, we've done that. Okay. Shall we move to second paper then? Is this okay? Is this an okay pace? I would like clarification of the total recipients of the food bag versus your total sampled. Is it still, so this was, you did your data collection from 2020 to 2021 for paper 2, and you were saying in your presentation during that time there were 250 people. And so that's...
some of them dropped out and then they feel they were taking new ones.
So this is what I was going to ask about. You
yes.
don't say that in your paper at all, there was an attrition rate. So in section 2.231, you discuss the 24-hour recall, and in 3.31, dietary diversity questionnaire, and you state that 55 existing and 36 new food bag subscribers. However, in section 3.32, food security, you say 67 food bag recipients and 42 new. And so it's just understanding what was, so you said 55 and 36 and then 67, 42. So how much was there link between all of the data? So were all the 55 and 36 consistent, then you just added more which dropped out, or
no,
what was the order?
But I can't give you an exact answer now. We did different times this, but I do not know.
So
I can't remember.
Was your data yet? You probably can't. It was 2.5 years ago.
Yes.
This is a really hard question in a Viva, but to try and replicate your work, this is me going.
I mean, I could find out.
Yeah.
I could go back to data and find out.
So how much was the data all anonymized within each survey, so you couldn't link across survey?
Yes, it was anonymized, but
Was it pseudo-anonymized, so you had participant codes, or was it totally anonymized, so the 67 and 55 can't link?
I'm not sure.
All fine? Just wanting to check. Yeah. So it was because in this also links to paper 2.3, this mismatch. So in paper 2, you do composition analysis of 12 bags, and in paper 3, you mentioned 30 bags.
Yes, then I had
so is this
an opportunity to.
Was this a boosted sample, or was this 30 new ones?
New ones.
Right. So I guess it's just understanding you don't comment at all the differences between the 12 and the 30. Were they statistically the same? Were they the same distributions in terms of weight, etc.? You don't mention any of that. It's kind of, it feels underdeveloped slightly. Was there so this was a unique opportunity to do new sampling in paper 3 then? Okay.
So we added those. I did put the data together.
You did?
Yes, I did.
In the results?
I think so.
Okay.
In the third paper.
In paper 3?
I think so.
But you've only got well, it was just you only list 30 bags in the appendix. So it was understanding was it 12 plus
18?
18?
Yes.
That was what it was. So everything in paper 3 is, so the paper 2 bags are part of paper 3.
Yeah.
Whew, okay,
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Sorry for the confusion.
No, that's fine. Were the 30 food bags in chapter 3, I'm jumping here a little bit because it was just trying to understand, a comprehensive sample for edibility and composition? Do you feel these were, was this representative or comprehensive of the wider bags that were generated?
Well, I think so. Yeah. But I don't know how to prove it.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
fine. And so
yeah.
it was just in terms of thinking about a power calculation
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
How many would you need to sample?
Oh,
You know,
much
if they were normally distributed, 30
Yes.
would be the absolute cutoff.
Yeah, yeah.
And so even doing 12, what does that show in terms of statistics? If we were
Right.
looking at distributions, like it would have been lovely to actually see the weight
Yeah.
distributions
Okay.
throughout in terms of those things. And you start getting that in your appendix there. Right. So you ask participants about food waste from the bags in terms of how much. So do you remember the phrasing of this question? I know it was 2 years ago. I tried to look in the survey for this in terms of what you actually asked, but I couldn't find it anywhere in terms of, and this is important in terms of how you phrase questions, is because you're asking a percentage recollection. So you're saying how much waste do you get on a weekly basis or on average from a bag? It would have just been useful to know that.
Yeah.
Or do you recall any of this at all?
How the question was formulated.
Yeah. Was it as a percentage or a weight or
It was a percentage that they were able to,
slide?
yeah,
Okay,
make a cross on that.
lovely. And then did you estimate where that cross was, or did they write the number?
I think I'm not now 100% sure, but I probably had like 50% or
Yeah.
something there.
And you, but it was just,
then they.
and it was a physical questionnaire or an online question?
Yeah. It was physical.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the
Yeah.
specific amount, because you know you have a range between 2 and 60, and so it's understanding. Did they say 2, or did
Yeah.
you estimate 2?
No, they said
They said it was 2%,
That's a good question.
because that
Right.
leads to some different assumptions in your
Yeah.
results.
No, I did not have like 2% scale there.
No,
That
no,
I
exactly.
certainly did.
So it's a tough one. It's a, so again, the only reason I asked this is I did a intervention where we chose 3 different metrics of just entering a number versus a sliding scale
Right.
versus doing a less accurate ABC, 10 to
Okay.
20, etc. And
Yeah.
each of them had their pitfalls.
Yeah.
But it was useful to know if I was trying to replicate which you
Yeah.
chose, and was it paper
Yeah.
or online,
Yeah.
etc. So do you also, so did you ask about waste beyond the bag or only full bag contents?
Put back on.
Only for the food bag. Okay. That's helpful to know. And again, this is where I was surprised you didn't mention Erica van Herpen's work, because she's done a lot in terms of recollecting on a percentage versus a food frequency diary what the level of food waste is from a person in a household. And so it was just interesting to see that lack of there. I also note you have provided demographic details for respondents. However, from your results, I cannot determine the number of children per household and how many households. So I can know that 1.8. So if you look in, I can bring up the table if people want to play along at home, but it's one of the appendix tables in paper 2. You can see it's 1.8 and 1.6 for adults versus children, average, not median in this case, because you switch in another table. The average amount of children per household sampled out of the 55 was 1.8, I think. So that means there definitely were children, and there definitely were probably more than one person per household as an adult as well.
Most of the time.
Most of the time, but
not
I don't
all.
have a statistic. There's not
No,
a proportion. You
no.
didn't report that. Were there any single people in your survey?
Yes.
Okay. Your results on rebound and substitution only assume it's a single person impact. To my reading of your paper, is that correct? So you're only ever looking at a single person's consumption.
Okay, so it was per membership. They got a questionnaire, and in that. Okay, let's think about the
Happy if you want to look through, or if anything
yeah.
helps.
Right.
Yeah.
Just trying to think. When I interviewed for the foods they consumed,
Yeah.
I was asking for the family.
For the family unit, what they consumed. So was this proportions?
No,
Because it's a
no,
24-hour
no.
recall.
Sorry, no, it was for the person.
Yeah.
It was for the person. And then also the questionnaire. That was for the family, like that was for the food bag, like the sort of what did the family say
Yeah.
that food bag. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it's a sorry, I'm just trying to think through how to pose this next question.
Yeah.
There's a mismatch there in your rebound effects between an individual's rebound and what a family may purchase, and your assumption set there in terms of presenting your results, possibly. But again, I feel that may be too hard to pick apart right now in the Viva in this defense. The level of food security in that same table, I can bring it up if you want, that shows there was food insecurity within this population.
Yeah.
Does this mean also that they may not have been able to actually buy anything else? So did that factor into how you calculated your rebound at all?
According to the results, I did not get the feeling or the information that they won't have been able to buy food, but it was more like maybe not eating.
The quantity or size?
Yeah.
Okay, in the UK, it's definitely a case of heat or eat or other things. And so if they don't have that, they do not eat.
Right.
So this is where my question is coming from.
I did see that with the soup kitchen visitors. So there it was clear that they...
And that's why you did the down to 2 meals rather than 3? Okay.
Yes. So the results were different.
How representative were the 24-hour recalls compared to other low-income food surveys? So in the previous survey for paper 1 and other dietary work in Sweden and globally, there, you can look at the bottom quintile of income of those food surveys. Did you compare at all your results of 24-hour recalls versus other surveys that were similar populations? No? Okay. Just wanted to check if you did data checks at all. You mentioned electricity for 1 hour of cooking per day. Sorry, I'm a big fan of cooking LCAs. This is why. This is, I mentioned there's a heat versus eat narrative. Do you think low-income people can afford to cook for 1 hour per day?
Well, perhaps at that time, but I won't be so sure lately.
Okay.
With the electricity prices going through the roof and everything going on.
So does that mean that, did you use that in your sensitivity analysis as a variable at all? No. Okay. I thought not, but I wanted to just confirm. I was thinking of this in terms of if I was replicating, what does this number actually mean? And I was trying to figure that out. There are different ways to calculate rebound effects. Did you look at cooking from scratch versus the meal from the soup kitchen? So was the rebound effect from the soup kitchen looking at overall consumption or ready meal or any of those sorts of... No? Okay. You didn't do a time use diary or anything like that in terms of how much time it's taking, how much time they actually have for things. If they're low income, they may be to shift working, they don't have time for food preparation. I notice in one of your questions you ask about transport, and this I'll come back to this later, but we'll come back to transport assumptions in the next paper. What does your sensitivity analysis results mean for the scalability of this type of intervention? So making it bigger, going bigger. Okay, that's fine. Just in terms of your, you have variability within your sensitivity analysis. and this was on a small sample group.
Mm.
If we were to take it up to the national level, are there any implications you could see because there will be bigger, the variability might come out more, as it were? But again, if we've not, we'll explore it. There's other things we can explore which are more fun. Shall we go there instead? Could you discuss the pros and cons of using the USD food safety questionnaire?
Pros and cons.
Yeah. Why did you choose the USDA? There's lots of food insecurity measures.
Right. Yes, I found afterwards another one. No, but yeah, the pro was that it was there. It was 6 points, I think it had. It had the short.
You should use the short form. Yeah.
And it was easy.
And it's been used. It's been
Yeah,
reviewed
yeah.
before. Any negatives?
I didn't think about that at the time, at least.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if there was some question that might have been misunderstood. I don't remember actually, but I was just like.
Did you look at doing I guess I would call it a validation exercise in terms of cross culture? So the UK government does not like the USD for exactly that reason, because the language doesn't work. Well, they say it doesn't work in the UK.
Right. Okay.
For exactly that reason, there's a cultural barrier.
Yeah.
I think it's fine, but again, each person and looking at how results turn out.
Yeah.
So again, it was just understanding, was there cultural barriers maybe that came up from it? Maybe, but that's could you clarify, you produce midpoint and endpoint life cycle analysis calculations. Who performed the midpoint and endpoint calculations? Was that all yourself?
I was doing it together with a colleague, Louise.
Okay, and she's a co-author on that paper?
Yes.
Okay. Could you justify or explain the exclusion of luxury items within?
Justify that?
Yeah.
Well, just thought that they might not have, it wouldn't be a top priority, or they would not be able to afford that kind of items. So therefore, we wouldn't consider that as substituted. Then, of course, it might have substituted something else.
Okay.
So if it was a pineapple or mango, I don't know, something that's expensive, but I just didn't imagine them buying those.
Okay.
But happily receiving them for free, for sure. But it is a difficult thing to know what that would substitute.
Yeah. Okay. It was just thinking about the nutritional density or the calorific density or even the carbon density of some of these luxury items and what that might mean.
Yeah.
But again, you have to make assumptions somewhere. Sorry, I'm aware of time and just trying to get to the right questions at the right time. So this is an in the weeds question. This will probably be the final one for this paper. You ask about, in question 9 in that survey, you ask how many food bags have you received from the food bag centre during the past 30 days? That's not presented anywhere in the rest of the paper. Was that data actually used, and how many what was the kind of spread of that number?
I think I asked that just to make sure whether they were new subscribers or already receiving.
Okay.
So that I could sort of
classify. So it was a classifier, not necessarily for use in your rebate.
No.
Okay. Because I could see how it could be used, but you didn't really mention it was being used in your. Okay. The last one would be around transportation impact. So you mentioned, do they bike, do they drive in your survey, but you don't mention a distance. And in your appendix, you don't mention distance either.
Right.
So how did you factor in where people lived, etc.?
Yes, I did do that. How did I do that?
Because I couldn't figure it out from that.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Biking was not an issue. I modeled buses and big cars.
Where did you get your conversion for that? We can pick this up later.
Yeah, I will happily provide that answer.
That's fine. Shall we move on to paper 4? So the novelty of this is it expands upon the previous work, as you've highlighted in your presentation. It links through to you actually provide the social, economic, and environmental rather than just quantification aspects of these recipes. I think the big thing here is, could you clarify the process of sorting popular versus unpopular meals?
We did some interviews
Yeah.
in the kitchen, so we could not ask the children,
Yeah.
so we used the next best thing. Yeah, as we wrote in the paper as well, there were some paradoxes.
So I meant
also-
actually
yeah.
just the act of classification.
Okay.
How do, so you get a recipe title or recipe ingredients?
The menu and the meal.
So it's just
Headline.
the title, the
Yeah.
headline?
Yeah.
So how do you, so was it just you doing classification or 2 of you?
It was 2 persons.
Did you blind yourselves and then compare afterwards?
They did, yes. I was not involved in that.
So you did not do the
No,
classification
no,
yourself?
no.
Okay. Did you design the classification process or?
Together.
Okay. So you probably are not the best person to talk through how it is classified at this.
No, but if you have questions, I'll.
No,
try
it
to
was
answer.
just trying to
Yeah.
understand,
How-
was there a rule set or something brought to identify popular versus unpopular meals? Because how did you classify? Because I would have expected to see an appendix saying this is what a popular meal is, or tick boxes for it has this or ingredient, or
Right.
what are the, because you obviously did thematic analysis of your results,
Yeah.
which were not audio recorded, they
Yeah.
were only typed,
Yeah.
and you then brought them to a rule set, which you then went to classify all 20, whatever thousand they were, 9,000.
Yeah. So we had a list of meals that were considered unpopular, and we had a list of meals that were considered popular.
And how many of the 9,000 meals did that represent, that list? 9,000 meal instances, shall we say?
I mean, they have a rolling
Yep.
menu list, so they
Well,
do repeat. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So of the 9,000, there's going to be repetition within that.
Yes.
It's just understand, and
Yeah.
again, it's not in the thesis in terms of the
Yeah.
percentage that you're able
No.
to simply classify
Yeah.
versus an assumption. And so it was understanding that process. But I get the
Yeah.
feeling this may
Yeah.
not be the best line
No.
of inquiry
No.
right now. You mentioned in your presentation, nutritious and popular meals can happen vegetarian. Where's the evidence of nutrition in this paper 3?
No.
Paper 4?
Paper
Is
4.
there nutritional compositional analysis in paper 4? Because I can understand, I can agree with your claim of popular, just where's nutrition come into that? Or is that based on nutrition guidelines for schools?
Yes.
Okay. Right. What software did you use to help with coding of the quantitative data?
Coding the.
So you did a thematic analysis via Braun and Clark's methodology? Or using Braun and Clark thematic analysis on your interviews?
Yes.
What software, or did you do it by hand manually?
Yes.
That's painful.
Yes.
So painful. Ow. Okay. At this point, was there any other software pieces you used for statistical analysis, modeling, etc., that you used throughout your thesis?
Modeling, no.
Did you use Excel for everything?
Pretty much.
So,
most of it CimaPro.
CimaPro?
Yes. Yeah.
So you use CimaPro? Did you use R, Python?
No.
So just all Excel?
Yep.
Cool. Just wanted to double check that. Like, that's a lot of pain and suffering you're pulling on yourself. Okay.
I realize that.
That's helpful to know, just in terms of the context of the effort and the skill base that you developed over this. If I was at a British Viva, I would have probably asked earlier about what training courses you went on during this to upgrade you, but that's not within this. You went to an art course, but you didn't use it.
No, because it would have taken too much time to.
Yeah, and again, we've
just like-
highlighted time constraints, and you did this within 4 years. So you've got 9,262 menu items there. And you make the claim popular meals should be favored over unpopular. Did you calculate the price and nutrition of all the different menus?
The price?
Price and, well, just in terms of, you look at these you're looking at these different menus. You provide a table of vegetarian versus non and the instances, but it seems you don't actually look at nutritional price of all of these different menus, or even in the 6 week in the next paper, there you don't look at all of the nutritional analysis or all of the price impacts of them.
No,
Okay.
I did this for the last paper.
Within the 9,262, it's a time series. Did you ever analyze across the time series how popular versus unpopular changes over time? So you didn't look at vegetarian shift over time, like did vegetarian increase from 2019 with the release of Eat Lancet or anything like that? Okay, all fine, might be fun to do. Why were the interviews not audio recorded? Okay, all good.
Yeah.
Just wanting to check. Finally, in the paper, you mentioned the forecasting model. This is never mentioned again, but you mentioned 5 grams a day for a forecasting model to help reduce food waste at the margin. So I don't know what that's about, but within the text, there's a thing saying the forecasting model says 5 grams a day is where you could margin. I was just trying to understand which piece of methods that related to, but I couldn't find that. That's paper 4, I think. Yeah. Yeah. So it was just wanting to double check what that was, because I couldn't find it anywhere else, or even the words are in your thesis. That's the only place it mentions it. Paper 5, you conducted a waste audit and you had help, or is it just yourself?
Oh, no, I have help.
Yep.
Very good help.
As somebody who did a waste audit for his thesis, I fully respect doing a waste audit. It's painful, it's slow, it's grueling. You did it centralized with waste supplied from kitchens. I'm going to just ask, you've got an appendix table. Which of the days was the day your vegetarian exclusive meal was on out of the 9 meals? Because I couldn't figure that out from your appendix. Shall I bring up the thing so you can just go, oh, it's this one? Sorry, this is honestly going to be leading somewhere. See, we're not using any of these this time. Here we go, this one. So within the different papers, shall I full screen that so it's a bit bigger? I originally thought April the 12th was the day because you had lasagna vegetarian.
Red lasagna is vegetarian.
And pasta ratatouille on the 11th. The catch is on the 11th, in your food audit results, you have rice, curry chicken, vegetables, and none of the lasagna until the 12th.
I think here they had.
So was it they were giving you the bag and dinner, you got it a day later, or just wanting to check how the flow went of your audit? Because was it on the same day, or?
I think, what was the other document you were looking at?
So that was,
Was that the menu?
So that was the school menu.
Yeah. Here, they actually didn't cook according to the menu. They had switched days.
Ah, right. Okay, that explains that.
Yeah.
It was just, I was, because you claimed in your method it was purchasing, it was on the day you did it, which would have been a lot of effort for those 10 days, and just wanting to recognize that.
Yeah, it was every day.
And that was, so that lasagna and ratatouille was the vegetarian one?
Yes.
Perfect, okay. Thank you for that. Did you code the meals that you had to audit as popular or unpopular?
When we were doing the plate-based.
Yes.
No. Should I have done that?
Well, it would have been interesting. You could have then had a validation.
Yeah. I don't know.
In obtaining the composite category carbon footprint, so for the salad and things like that, did you use proportionate or equal weighting for each of your ingredients? So did you basically go, there was this much chickpeas and this much celery in your salad mix, and so I did a weight, or did you just take chickpeas and celery and mush all of the footprints together? Because from your text, that's what it seems to be, but I just wanted to double check that.
That was the case.
Okay, not trying to trip you up. In your first paper, you did the opposite.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, so was there a reason you chose to not do proportionate in this?
There wasn't really, could have been the reason then this time.
Simplicity is,
Well, lack of data, because I had access to all the data from RISE for the first paper.
But not for any of this, you just had the menu name.
Yeah.
Okay,
I didn't use it.
that's helpful.
Yeah.
For the LCA data, did you calculate just the LCA of waste or for the full menu item and then cast it down to the waste proportion? So you found what waste was in the bin and had those waste types and then calculated LCA numbers off those. Okay, so you didn't look at the carbon footprint of the full menu item versus the carbon footprint of what was wasted. Okay, just double checking because I couldn't tell from there. Okay, paper 6. We've done duration, we've done follow-up, we've done functional unit. Your table presented has 95% confidence bars, but in the text you mention outliers, but so you presented as median. How bad were the outliers then? Pretty bad. And again, this is, I guess, why Erica's paper, because she's got some massive outliers and shows food waste. And again, you highlighted your supervisor's work, 40% of food waste is generated by 40% of the population, as it were. And so it fits that narrative, but it was understanding the distributions of that waste. And wanting to understand, this distribution, you had outliers. Is there any other things you want to reflect upon in terms of why you chose to do confidence intervals on your graphics rather than just a single scatters and things like that?
I don't know. I think this was just usually pleasing.
Okay. We've discussed pedagogic meal sample size being 5. Are you happy with the robustness of that?
Really?
Not really? Okay. Again, this is a safe space and a supportive space. And again, sometimes things fail. Are you happy with how you've presented the results there for pedagogic meals because of that?
I'm not sure. I haven't thought about it.
Okay.
That I could have done better.
It's just, I guess, in your main thesis, you don't use sample sizes at all within your main thesis. So it feels like you're slightly trying to hide that your recruitment didn't go as well as you planned. Okay. You kind of just say, yes, there's an amazing reduction for this and an okay reduction for this. Control stayed the same.
Like that, yeah.
And so it's just understanding what was happening there. We've talked about follow-up. We've talked about the impact of these different interventions and how they're different. I feel those were my main points, and we've gone for 1.5 hours non-stop. So I'm fully aware we are probably exhausting. I have other things, but I feel that I'm satisfied with the level of questioning that I've given there. Can I first congratulate you again on that discussion? If you're happy with that, I hand back to you.
Okay. If you're happy with, you can go on if you want to ask more questions. It's up to you.
No. I feel that there's minor things which the examiners made, but those were my main issues over an hour and 40 minutes. So thank you again, and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So who wants to start in the committee?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I was very pleased with the PhD as well. So my main interest, as you may know, is like the sustainability assessments. And for example, the one on food donation, I thought was very, very interesting. Christian already touched upon some points on this, but I only got a bit more confused, I must say now. For example, for the soup kitchen, as I understood it from the papers, in the substitution effect, you included the cooking impacts in the, well, this in the soup kitchen, but in the substitution, cooking impacts were not included. Am I right?
I'm not sure I follow the question now.
Because you obviously calculate the impacts associated with cooking food in the soup kitchen. There's like, I read this, like this 1 hour of electricity used in the soup kitchen for preparing the food in the food kitchen.
Right.
Which makes
So
sense,
electricity,
huh?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that they
Yeah.
have 1 hour
Yeah.
of cooking in the soup
Yeah.
kitchen. Whereas I understand that for the substitution effect, if you look at what people would have, what it substitutes, it doesn't
okay.
substitute any cooking effects like at the recipients. Whereas if you think that all of these recipients would be cooking at home, it would be summing up more than just 1 hour. And then I was confused because Christian asked people cook for 1 hour, but I understood that if all the recipients would be cooking, it would even be more than 1 hour somehow.
But the soup kitchen recipients were not necessarily cooking at home. They were representing a homeless group of people. Well, not 200%, but to a large degree. So, but of course, I mean, they would have eaten maybe some cooked food somehow. So that's true. I did not count for that.
It makes sense, of course, if they're like homeless, but that wasn't really clear from the paper why it wasn't then included. So that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Because both in terms of impacts and cost savings at recipients level, that would be like a substitution effect or savings effect. Okay. I have a second question. Can I go on? Because it's also still about the food donation, so maybe it makes sense to just do it. So I feel like with the substitutions in the cooking, etc., it's not included, or if it's not substituting, then cooked meals, the food kitchen has a lower substitution effect. So it's like being punished because it's not substituting cooked food or whatever, which is fine because that's reality. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But then you would think that at social level, there's a huge thing as if if these people were not cooking before or they didn't have these meals. I also read normally they would be eating 2.5 meals, but now they're having 4.5. You know, how is this being reflected in the social dimension? In the social dimension, I only find like what the dietary diversity score or the food security score is at this moment once they're receiving the food donation, but there's no information on what it would have been before. I would be interested in hearing how much of changes did your intervention bring actually? How much did it increase?
So we did a survey with the food bank recipients and old ones, and there we could see a difference after receiving food bags. But it was more difficult with the soup kitchen visitors because we only had a sample of 9 people. So, but and I don't remember now by heart how many. No, but there we didn't have this new or old really. So it was more like a question of if you are not visiting, what are you eating? And when you are visiting, what are you eating?
But is this then being shown because this table on the social impacts only social effects only shows like, in my opinion, that's the current situation. So from there, if you see that, for example, based on food security, that the food bags would be better than the food kitchen, whereas maybe in reality, the food kitchen recipients were terribly off before. So it actually this would have been better for them. The change that was made by.
Right. Maybe I have to look at the table. So I can explain.
Paper 2.
The table on the paper 3, table, no, it's not table 3, table 5.
Paper 3, table 5.
Yes, page 15.
Bring it up for everybody at home. What?
So, right.
Yes, the first 2 lines actually on food security and dietary diversity would be interesting to see like what would be the delta, the difference that was brought by your intervention. So if you look now, like just looking at food security, you think that food bag is better than soup kitchen. but maybe the food bag people were already at 3 or something.
Because I know I had data that there is a difference, but I don't remember how I have thought here when I'm presenting this.
Maybe I can add the other question, like for the environmental and economic dimension, it's pretty easy based on the numbers to select which one would be best. We know that the hybrid model is like reality. You don't have like just food bag, food kitchen. But here, how do I interpret the social dimension? Which one would be best, or do you
I think you need
you
both.
both?
You need both. The food kitchen was part of the hybrid model, making the food back center work so well because they were receiving food that was about to expire and they cooked it into meals. Otherwise, that would have been wasted. So I think I see it as an integral part, even though I have also looked at them separately. Yeah, definitely together. I need to check this because I don't understand what I've done now, but I know there was I could detect difference.
Okay,
And I could draw the conclusion that they remained food insecure. They did not become food secure, but it did improve.
It did improve.
Yeah.
Would have been interesting to see.
I understand.
But
Yeah, I don't know why I haven't included.
Okay,
I'll come back on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. For now,
Okay. Good. Thank you, and thanks for the chance to read the thesis as well. I actually stay on table 3.
Okay.
So the like figure 4. Thank you.
Lucky I did this then.
No, sorry. Figure 4.
Oh, figure 4.
Well done there.
Figure 5.
Maybe you don't have it.
Did I not? Oh, I can't see it in.
This one with the arrows.
No, I didn't. I thought I wasn't going to question the other
I'm
one.
sorry. It's
No, figure 3.
anyway, it shows negative numbers. So my question is about this figure 4 net global warming potential impact. So you have the 3 different things: anaerobic digestion, food bag, and soup kitchens. And you have negative numbers there. And we usually don't like to see negative numbers. But I was wondering, like, what do you do with these negative numbers? Like, who gets those negative numbers?
Who understands them?
Yeah. And who actually receives the negative numbers? Because you have like a retailer that's giving the food, wasted food, and the soup kitchen or anaerobic digester receiving food waste. How should that be accounted for, and who should account for negative numbers?
I see this as an information for the policymakers, I guess, to rank the options simply. Yeah. I mean, otherwise, I don't know how else to rank them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it could.
Yeah.
That's what I was kind of missing in more like the discussion, like
Discussion, yeah.
where is it going to be used?
Yeah.
So, for example, because earlier in the text you also talked about the Italians, they can get tax credits for food waste. But in this case, you're also giving food waste. So should the ICA or something be credited carbon emissions for the food waste that they've given away? Would that be a good idea, or?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know. Probably have to think in a larger picture. They still contribute to the waste problem, I would say. So, but they were not really getting any benefit from doing this. And but the situation today could look a little bit different as well, because now we have a new regulation where you need to separate the packaging from the organic waste. and suddenly the picture has turned around a little bit because it's a resource. They don't have necessarily the resources to separate.
So they're donating more or donating?
It looks like we don't really have a lot of data on that, but it starts to look like it. And yeah, so these they actually might be gaining quite a lot, and it would be interesting to look at that later.
Then another question related to this, so this general picture. So you have, so you talk about LCA as one of the methods that you use, but only in one paper you go beyond carbon difference.
Yeah.
Do you assume carbon is a good proxy for sustainability?
Yes.
Why?
Why? Well, I don't know why otherwise, but just based on what I saw, the results from my papers, so, or that paper, and that it is widely used and understood. And there are certainly other aspects that are important as well. You can't forget this, but,
And I have another question. So just to come back to the question asked you. So you were talking about that you went to different two, I think, conferences.
Right.
And then I'm looking like where your papers are published and where is your scientific knowledge being used? Like what field you consider yourself something? Food waste scientist or food waste scientist or some other like more established discipline?
Yeah, currently I see myself food waste scientist, but I haven't really had time to think about this at all. I'm just been working on this. Right. I see myself broad somehow.
Not like a material flow analysis.
No.
Or
But I mean, it's a really excellent method to use, and it was really good to use it. But I like to apply different methods and look at the different aspects. I think that makes it interesting. I have hard time placing myself somewhere.
I have another one, maybe last question. So just more general and like your personal thoughts. So you looked at different ways to reduce food waste, actually, and where's your heart in those? Which are you most like passionate about?
I'm passionate about the metabolic food waste, and I'm passionate about the school meals, because I do believe in school meal system. And on it, I mean, all of it. I mean, it's difficult not to. And basically because there is this linkage between for consuming the food instead, that we can actually, instead of, I don't know, doing something else at the lower levels. What was I thinking? I forgot now. There was something. It's exciting.
I think for now I'll leave there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to commend you on the wide range of the topics that you covered in your thesis, and also the wide range of discussions that we've heard.